When you're a conservative, it's probably best not to expect too much help from the New York Times, just as a rule. But even the flagship of the establishment media has to concede Rick Santorum is clear, consistent, and conservative. Earlier this week, the paper ran an article titled, "Santorum Writings Voice Strikingly Consistent Views." Over the last decade, Mr. Santorum has been a prolific writer of op-ed articles, letters to the editor, and guest columns in some of the country's largest and most influential newspapers. All the while, he displayed many of the traits that define him as a presidential candidate today: a deep and unwavering Catholic faith, a suspicion of secularism, and a conviction that the country was on a path toward cultural ruin. A review of his columns and letters going back 10 years reveals a striking consistency in his conservative political views and spiritual guiding principles. As someone who has known Rick for almost 20 years, I'm not surprised at all. With Rick and Karen and their beautiful family, what you see is what you get. Rick is fearless, and his tenacious campaign is refocusing our national conversation on first principles. Defiant of the liberal scorn, Rick is resolute in his defense of marriage, faith in the public square, and the sanctity of innocent human life. Unbowed by political correctness, Rick openly names the radical Islamist ideology of our terrorist enemies and the terror states that must be overthrown. Never content to just check the box, Rick has used his time in public office to pursue and sometimes achieve consequential results. Whether it was Social Security reform and a balanced budget amendment, which failed, or welfare reform and the ban on partial birth abortion, which succeeded, Rick Santorum has always taken on the big issues that mattered. That's why I am so pleased and proud to be here today to introduce to you my friend, the next President of the United States, Rick Santorum.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, David. Thank you. You're eating into my time. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, David. Thank you all. It is great to be home. We've been out there on the campaign trail. Representing the family here today is my daughter, Sarah Maria, my 14-year-old. The last time many of you saw my daughter, Sarah Maria, was standing next to me at a podium 6 years ago, holding a little baby doll that matched her own dress, and with tears running down her eyes. And that night was obviously a sad night in many respects. But I always say as I come back and talk to people in Pennsylvania, the only thing I feel toward the people of Pennsylvania is just overwhelming and profound gratitude of the opportunities that the people of this state gave me, first in Western Pennsylvania, and in the impossible win in 1990 at the age of 32, running for the first time ever. And the conservative movement just pulled together in Western Pennsylvania, that conservative movement that many people didn't think existed in southwestern Pennsylvania. And we were able to accomplish an amazing thing. And went down and started the Gang of Seven and cleaned up the Congress and did all sorts of great stuff. And the beautiful thing was, in that race and in so many other races, I always say the greatest gift I ever had as a politician was low expectations and being underestimated. And I've always said the greatest gift of any politician is to be underestimated. Better than money, better than volunteer, better than anything. And that was the greatest gift in our first race. And we were able to win and then win again in a redistricted district that was 70% Democrat, and then win again. And as the conservative movement in Pennsylvania came together in a great year in 1994 to win a governor's race and win a Senate race. And it was an amazing time. And here I was as growing up as a young kid in southwestern Pennsylvania in Butler in a steel town, living on a VA grounds in public housing as a first-generation American coming from Italian-American descent. And it was just an incredible dream. And I like I said, I keep going back to the gift that the people of this state gave me. And people always say, well, how do you feel about your loss in 2006? I said, the people of Pennsylvania didn't always give me what I wanted, but they always gave me what I needed. And it was in many respects for me, a great gift to get away, to separate out, to get back and involved in the private sector and have a little distance from Washington to see what was going on. It was a painful night, that night in many respects, but it was a night that I felt that I needed to sort of reassess and take a good look at me and my family and being a husband and a father, and take that responsibility a little bit differently, a little bit more seriously, as the life of a senator was not one that was necessarily conducive to that. But the greatest gift from a political point of view was that distance, was being able to look from the outside in of what was going on and begin to see the frustration that I would hear from you, from conservatives, as senator, the frustration about what was going on in Washington, that candidly, I will be honest, I just didn't quite resonate with me, because you're in there sort of doing the sausage making, and it's like, well, they don't understand, and in a sense, I didn't understand. And that was really a tremendous gift to be able to see it from the perspective of what really is going on as opposed to what's going on in the fray. And it was a real eye-opening, awakening experience for me. And I took that as a good sort of self-correction. And as I continued on in coaching Little League and trying to win Father of the Year award and Husband of the Year award, I always usually sort of lost in nail biters, but I kept fighting. I kept fighting, doing the best I could, and trying to provide for the family. And then Barack Obama happened. And like so many people who were sitting on the sidelines for so long, a lot of conservatives, a lot of Tea Party people who just sort of saw things as, well, things are just not good, but it's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, things are bad, but they can get worse. Well, they got worse. And I saw, to me, it was very, very clear to me, I think it is to many people, that fundamental things are at stake in America today. That this isn't just more of the same, but a real turning point in our history as a country. And I think, like many of you, it was not sufficient enough just to sit on the sidelines and throw darts and write columns or do whatever is necessary, but you had to get out and do something. So I went out and started crossing the country, particularly focused on one bill, Obamacare. To me, this was the linchpin of all linchpins. This was a linchpin that was going to change the entire interaction between government and the American people. Margaret Thatcher said when she left the prime ministership of England that she was never able to accomplish what Ronald Reagan accomplished in transforming America back from the brink of socialism, really, in the 1960s and 70s. And she said the reason for that was the British national healthcare system, people's dependency on government, people's direct tie to government on something that was absolutely essential for them, their health and their life. And that once the government has you and has that relationship, they got you. And here I'm seeing what I thought was an incredible act of hubris. Well, it was, but a foolish act of hubris on the part of the president on shoving this health care bill down the throats of the American people. I thought to myself, why are they doing this? In fact, I was in the green room with Juan Williams about 2 days before the House vote to finally pass Obamacare. And I asked him that question. You guys are committing political suicide. You're going to lose the next election. And this is what Juan Williams said to me. He said, let me tell you what the White House just told me. They said, we believe Americans love entitlements, and once we get them hooked on this entitlement, they will never let it go. That's how they see you. That's how they see America. It's a bunch of people who need them and need to get hooked so they can rule and run your lives better than, of course, you can. That they can decide things for America collectively in Washington better than 300 million people in America can build a great and just society from the bottom up. When I heard that, I knew it was right. I knew that's what they believed. And I knew also that they were willing to lose. How many congressmen did Democratic congressmen lost here in Pennsylvania? And they all voted for it. And to a person, they knew what they were doing was going to lose them their election. But to a person, I believe they all believe this too, that if President Obama is reelected and Obamacare is implemented, within 10 years, they'll all be back. Because after that, America will become, well, more like the countries that your ancestors left to come to America to get rid of the government control of their lives. That's why I decided to come out, and certainly an unlikely journey. As I remember coming up here to Pennsylvania and try to talk to people about running for the Senate, it was a little, well, let's say, amusing, the response that I would get. They'd say, what are you possibly thinking? I mean, you run for president of the United States? How could you do that? You lost your last race. You got creamed here in Pennsylvania. How is that a springboard? I said, who loses their last race and runs for president? Okay, Abraham Lincoln. That's right. All right. Well, I just was out there crossing America, and we just decided that there needed to be a voice. I looked at the field, and I said, particularly the front runner, I thought, you know, of all of the racism, all of the issues, unfortunately, and I think Governor Romney's a decent man, but he's uniquely disqualified to take on this race because the central issue in this race is going to be Obamacare, is going to be the impact of Obamacare on our economic growth, our unemployment rate, government involvement in your life, government control, the size and scale of government, the explosion of government and deficits on so many levels. And so many levels, Obamacare is the imposition, as we saw, on people's not just economic freedom, but religious freedom. This is a signature issue for everything that has gone wrong among the American left that is trying to impose their will on the good people of this country. And unfortunately, I looked at it that Governor Romney can't make that argument. The other folks who were in this race, I didn't think were in that position either, so I figured I'd have to go out and just make the argument. I knew a lot of folks wouldn't pay attention to me. I'll never forget one of my favorite graphics was about a week before the Iowa caucuses. The New York Times put together a graphic of the campaign caravans that were crisscrossing Iowa in pursuit of the Iowa caucuses. And they did it in alphabetical order, and it's a great graphic. You can still find it online, and it had Michelle Bachmann. It had 3 SUVs and a bus and several staffers, and then Herman Cain, a bus and a couple SUVs and staffers, and then down and Mitt Romney, an airplane, a bus, and all this stuff. And then all the way down at the bottom, I mean, all these things, people stretched out, buses, cars, all the way at the bottom is my son John, a guy named Chuck, and a Dodge Ram pickup truck. Which, of course, we called the Chuck truck. And so here I am, doing 385 town hall meetings all across the state of Iowa, all 99 counties, everything from going to one county in Montgomery County, Iowa, sort of like Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. I got one person to come, and Oh, a little shot at Montgomery County there. Sorry about that. But you know, it was amazing. By the way, we won Montgomery County, Iowa. But it was amazing. The response, though, was people say, how did you keep going? You're sitting at 3, 4, 5% in the polls. Why did you keep going? Because every meeting I would go to, as many as 1 or 10 or 20, and sometimes 200 or 300, people would leave and take signs and sign up to help. And yet, there wasn't any kind of recognition of that in the polls. About 2 weeks before the election, we were still sitting at 5%. Everybody said, why don't you get out? I've been hearing a lot of that throughout the course of this campaign. Why don't you get out? And so I said, you know, the reason I'm not getting out is because the people I'm actually talking to out there, you know, are supporting us when they hear from us. And I always believed that we wouldn't get a big bump in the polls, nobody would pay attention to us, that we would have to earn it. And so that's what we went out and tried to do. Just like when I knocked on 20,000 doors when I ran for the House in the 18th District in Pennsylvania in 1990, just went out and worked for it and believed that conservatives would respond to a conservative message and a conservative messenger. Respond to a vision. We went out and I didn't talk about nuts and bolts so much, but I talked about what was important in this race. You see it behind me in a lot of the speeches I give, the word freedom. Because ultimately, I believe that's the big issue. I say all the time that, you know, the economy is important, the unemployment rate's important, national security is important. All of these issues that we're dealing with is important. But it's like saying, I care as a father about whether my daughter has a fever. But the unemployment rate and the economic growth and all of the other things, the budget deficit, they're symptoms of a greater problem. You want to find what's the cause of the fever, what's causing the symptom. And that is that we have a country and a government that is robbing us of our freedom, and Americans do not perform well when they have a yoke of government on their shoulders. So I've been out talking about freedom. I've been out talking about who we are. When Ronald Reagan gave his farewell address, he gave a warning to the American public in his last comments. He said he was concerned about the future of America because of the popular culture and the media and the education system of this country was not teaching Americans who we really are, and that Americans would forget who we are. Winston Churchill always said, the debate is not about the future, it is about the past. It's an odd thing to think about. But in fact, it's how we view who we are, where we came from, what America has been, that charts the course as to what America will be. If you, like President Obama, who gives speech after speech talking about how America is broken, how capitalism doesn't work, how we have a fundamentally unfair system, inequality abounds, discrimination abounds, capitalism is a failure, individualism is a failure, and we need a heavier hand of government to make sure everybody is equal, and there's fairness. Well, then you look back at America, and you say, well, he looks back at America and say it hasn't worked. He gave a speech a year ago after Paul Ryan's first budget came out, where Ryan attacked all of these entitlement programs and said we had to reduce these programs, actually respect the 10th Amendment and send these programs back to the states. And Barack Obama came forward and said, and listed all of these entitlement programs, now 60% of the budget, and said, I'm quoting him, America is a better country because of these commitments. I'll go one step further, he said. America was not a great country until these programs. That's how Barack Obama views the past. That it is the current expansion and explosion of the federal government that makes America great. That's the reason that President Obama has had a hard time uniting America, because he doesn't see America the way most Americans see America. I think one of the ways that people say, how can you bring people together? Rick, you're pretty conservative. Remind Americans who we are. Go back to the founding principles of our country. And that's one of the reasons I always say a an attaboy and a thanks to the Tea Party movement because they've revived a document that I can tell you in Washington was pretty much a dead letter, and that was the United States Constitution and the importance of that document for our country. Well, I traveled around Iowa holding up my Constitution and talking about how we have to get back to first principles. We have to communicate to the American public the importance of rediscovering America and what made America great. And of course, what made America great was a belief in limited government and the unlimited potential of the American people. But I also reminded when I held up that Constitution that that is the operator's manual of America. It's the how of America, but it is an important document. But it could be a dangerous document if it wasn't tethered to another document that is the anchor upon which America can remain steadfast and great. And that is, of course, our Declaration of Independence. It is that document that I think best describes what the term American exceptionalism is all about. At the heart of American exceptionalism is this revolutionary concept that heretofore had never been introduced as a governing concept. We all know these words. We take them for granted, but I don't think we really, at least I didn't, understand the transformational nature of those words, not just in creating a government, but in transforming human history. The idea that we hold these truths. See, back then they weren't afraid to say the word truth. They weren't afraid of being called judgmental or radical theocrats by saying, well, there is truth. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, imagine, folks, the idea at that time where they had come from countries where rights were held by the king and disseminated to the king, that the divine right of kings, emperors, for thousands of years. And we were going to do something fundamentally different, that we were going to say, no, rights come to each and every person equally. Equally. Why? Because we are a creation of a loving God. And we have dignity because of that. People say, Rick, why do you talk about issues of faith and family on the campaign trail? You do this all the time, and they pigeonhole you as a social conservative candidate. At the heart of America, we are a moral enterprise. We are a people that believe in the dignity of every human life because, as Abraham Lincoln referred to it, as the divine spark. That's who we are. That's why we became great, because we realized with limited government and a free people living lives consistent with our founder's vision, consistent with the vision of respecting life, giving people the freedom to go out and pursue their dreams, to pursue happiness. Happiness defined back then was true happiness, not the pleasure, enjoyment, or sort of this narrow, almost nihilistic view of happiness today, but they understood happiness for what it was and what it was defined as back then. It was to do the morally right thing, because that, of course, will lead you to true happiness, to do what you ought to do, not whatever you want to do. That's what freedom is really about. That was the moral enterprise that was America, that we were responsible for providing for ourselves. We wanted government to be limited. We never looked to the government. We looked to ourselves, our families, our neighbors, our churches, our schools. our civic and community organizations. Read de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. America was different from France because we built this great and good society, understanding our own responsibilities to work, to provide for ourselves and each other. And we transformed the world. For 2,000 years prior to 1776, life expectancy in the world had been about 35 to 40 years of age. We were an agrarian society. And in 200 years, life expectancy has doubled. We went from an agrarian to an industrial to a technology society, and the creature comforts and the state of wealth and prosperity in this country, and now because of us around the world, is something even science fiction books wouldn't have considered 50 or 60 years ago. This is the dynamism of who we are, and it is absolutely at stake in this election by a government that believes that those days are behind us, and what we need to do now is make sure that we reallocate the resources to make sure that everybody ends up at the same place. Ladies and gentlemen, that's why this is the most important election of your lifetime. That's why when I went out across Iowa and I would deliver that message and reminding people who we are and saying we need someone who can paint a vision that talks about limited government, balancing the budget in 5 years, which I propose, cutting $5 trillion in spending, going out and putting forth a bold tax plan that actually mirrors pretty much what Paul Ryan just put out. 2 tax rates, 10 and 28%, a simplified tax code, 5 deductions, cut the corporate tax in half, make it a flat tax, simple, no deductions, no exclusions, simple tax. And of course, eliminating the corporate tax for manufacturers and processors. Why? Because we want to create opportunities for things to be made in America again. We got to talk about how we're going to revitalize the energy sector of the economy. I think the biggest issues in this election are going to come down, obviously, to the economy. But there are 2 big issues that are out there. Number one, health care. 75% of Americans disagree with the federal government being able to order you to buy health insurance. And who is the best person to make the argument against that? Is it someone who 20 years ago, when Bill Clinton was talking about health care, after Harris Wofford won this election in 1991, saying if you have a right to a lawyer, you have a right to a doctor. We all remember that, those of us old enough to remember that. And some of us said, you know what, we better have conservative ideas on health care. And so I worked with a guy on the budget committee named John Kasich. And we came up with a concept called medical savings accounts, now called health savings accounts. Private sector reform, believing in bottom-up free people. 300 million consumers can control cost and provide for themselves better than a government-mandated system. For 20 years, I've been advocating for this. When I ran in 1994, that's what we ran on. I've got a strong track record to show a stark contrast with President Obama on the signature issue of the day. Unfortunately, the other candidate in this race, the leading candidate in this race, the candidate who said that it would take an act of God for Rick Santorum to win this nomination. I don't know about you, but I believe in act of God. So what's his record on health care? The creator of Romneycare, a government-mandated health care system that is driving costs through the roof, the highest insurance rates in the country in Massachusetts, the highest increases in insurance rates in the country, $2 billion over budget. You're paying for it because almost all of the people that have been added to the Massachusetts healthcare system have been added to Medicaid, which you are helping to subsidize. It's creating waiting times, exploding costs. It's dictated to every person in Massachusetts what health care they will have. And Governor Romney went out and said in this last election that he likes mandates. Mandates work. We should have more mandates so we don't allow these free riders in health care. And then in 2009, in the heart of the debate under Obamacare, what did Governor Romney do? He advocated for the Massachusetts system to be adopted by President Obama. And unfortunately, the president listened to him. And that's exactly what we have. Now, Governor Romney will come out and say, oh, we need to repeal the bad parts of Obamacare. While still defending Romneycare. Can you imagine what this general election is going to look like on the issue that is the best issue for us to be able to defeat Barack Obama? It will be a negative for us with Governor Romney on the ticket. President Obama will be able to turn it against him. Why would we take the most important issue, the one that has the most profound impact on our economy, on our unemployment rate, on our freedom, on energizing conservatives and Tea Party folks? Why would we give that issue away in this election? And it's not just that. What's the other big issue right now? Energy costs. Well, you all know, I'm a grandson of a coal miner. Those of you who look at my record, there was nobody more for mining and drilling. I understand very clearly that the lower the energy costs, the higher the quality of life and standard of living in America. As simple as that. And I never went out and said gasoline costs are going to remain high. It's just a fact of life. And in fact, that's the way it should be, which is what Governor Romney said in 2006. I never went out and said that we need to reduce the amount of drilling and mining, taking fossil fuels out of the ground because we were worried about man-made global warming. Governor Romney did. Governor Romney and Speaker Gingrich, I might add, both bought into man-made global warming, the climate science, which we now know was political science. And here we are facing an energy spikes, and of the 29 states that have adopted green energy proposals and requirements, their energy costs are 32% higher than the states that do not have those. This is the radical environmentalism. But our leading candidate agreed with the radical environmentalists, imposed the first CO2 cap on power plants, coal-fired power plants. How's that going to go over in Western Pennsylvania? Put the first CO2 and trumpeted it as the first step to dealing with man-made global warming. Here is an issue that I've gone out and said we need to drill offshore, we need to drill in Alaska, we need to drill on federal lands, we need to open up I was just down in Louisiana, and by the way, I think we're going to have a pretty good day in Louisiana today. And I was just down there, and they're telling me they don't have a moratorium on deep water, they have a permitorium. They can't get permits. 11 rigs costing investment of about $24 billion have left the Gulf and aren't coming back under this administration because they're not granting permits. The president's new energy plan has shut down the eastern Gulf of Mexico offshore, the Atlantic and Pacific coast, won't drill in Alaska, won't build a Keystone pipeline. What a joke to go to Cushing, Oklahoma and take credit for something he had nothing to do with. But what can Governor Romney do? Nothing. He agreed with him. He's now for repealing Obamacare. He's now for drilling. But he wasn't. As his top advisor said, you take out the Etch-a-Sketch and just shake it up. Start all over. Folks, we don't need people who write their public policy in Etch-a-Sketches. As David Taylor just told you, the New York Times said I'm maddeningly consistent on my public policy positions. Now, you're going to find as the campaign starts here and Governor Romney starts running ads that I'm one of the most liberal people to ever run for president. Coming from the moderate governor of Massachusetts, I remind you, in 1994, I ran as a conservative against Harris Wofford here in Pennsylvania, in a state that has, as you know, at the time, over 500,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans. We won 9 Senate seats that year. It was the best Senate election in the history of the Republican Party. Mitt Romney ran also in Massachusetts and lost by 17 points because he didn't run as a conservative. He ran to the audience he thought he had to run in front of to win. Etch-a-sketch. Look at just what happened the other day in Puerto Rico. The press has not reported on this. I suspect that very few of you know about this. You saw, well, Governor Romney won Puerto Rico. Oh, great organization, the governor was for him. No, that's not what happened. What happened is I went down to Puerto Rico right after the Alabama and Mississippi elections. We did pretty well there too. And what happened is I went down there, I was asked a question about Puerto Rican statehood. Why? Because 100% of Republicans are for statehood in Puerto Rico. It defines the Republican Party. If you're a statehooder, you're a Republican. And so I was asked the question, do you believe in statehood? I said, sure, I do. I have no problem with it. They said, what about the condition of having to speak the English language? Because only 15% of Puerto Ricans speak English. And I said, well, of course they'd have to speak the English language. I believe that as I've campaigned on, that English should be the official language of this country and people should speak English. Now, I say that as someone who's the son of an Italian immigrant who came to this country speaking Italian. And my father always told me the greatest gift he ever has was he was made to learn English because English is the language of success in America. And we are denying people that opportunity if we don't teach them English. And so I said those very things in Puerto Rico. I was blasted because it's an impediment for the stateholders to get in if there's a requirement, which there is, but they don't enforce it, to teach English in the schools in Puerto Rico. They don't in the public. They do in the private schools. But in most of the public schools, they don't. And so I said that would be a requirement and it would be the official language like it is in this country. I got blasted. 2 days later, Governor Romney comes down. Governor Romney has the same position I do. English should be the official language of the country. He goes down to Puerto Rico. He's asked the same question. He says, oh, no, I would accept Puerto Rico as they are. They don't have to speak English. We don't, as conservatives, want a candidate that we can't trust to say the same thing before two different groups. We can't have a candidate who is going to go into this general election and not be able to go after President Obama on the key economic issues and the key issue of freedom in this country because he is uniquely disqualified to do so. That's why people say, why are you in this race? Looks like Governor Romney has all the money. Yes, in the races he's defeated me, he has outspent me on average about 8-1, which is pretty much what he's outspent me in the races that I've won. We've won 10 states. Driving around in the truck in Iowa 2 weeks before the election at 5%. Running a marathon, breezing through a swizzle stick for money. And we've won 10 states against the establishment candidates with all the endorsements, all the media saying this is inevitable, being outspent widely. Who's the best candidate to go against Barack Obama? Someone who wins races by pummeling their opponent, by outspending them, having the media on their side, all the endorsements, or someone who in a general election has what it takes, because we're not going to outspend Barack Obama 10-1 in this race. We're going to be outspent, no matter who the candidate is. We are not going to have the media on our side. We're not going to have all the favorable press and the air of inevitability behind us. We're going to have to connect with voters. We're going to have a vision for them as to where America is going to be. We're going to have to show contrast between what this president's view of America is and what it means to each and every one of you in America, and versus the conservative view. When people vote for president, they want to vote for someone they like and someone they trust. As you know, in Pennsylvania, a lot of folks who voted for me, particularly in the eastern half of the state, didn't necessarily agree with me. But I heard this many, many times as I traveled through the Southeast. I don't believe in the same things that you believe in. I don't agree with you on every issue. But I believe that you believe what you believe in. And I trust you. This is the most important election in our lifetime. It may be the most important election in the history of our country. We are the generation that has the obligation, like everyone, to carry that torch of freedom and pass it on to the next generation. At the end of the Declaration in Philadelphia, they signed this clause at the end upon which their names rested under. And it said, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor. No one here is going to have to pledge their life over the next few weeks between now and the primary in Pennsylvania. I'm not asking you to do that to maintain freedom. I'm not asking you to pledge your fortune. But if you do go to ricksantorum.com, you can pledge a little of your fortune. You can sign up for a call at home program. You can volunteer and help. But I am, and you know, we are putting our honor on the line. You stand on the shoulders of your ancestors, on great Pennsylvanians who've contributed so much to this country and to the state, that have blessed this land with not just innumerable riches, but the greatest benefit of all, freedom. And we possibly, if we fail in this endeavor, will be the generation that lets that shining city on the hill's light go out. Not just a shining city for us or the people who come here, but we inspire the world by what we believe in. The dignity and value and worth and opportunity of every person. We are a light for the world. And we are in danger of allowing that light go out under our watch. You ask me why I'm up here. Why did I do this? How is this possibly happening? Because Americans know just what I said is at stake. And they want someone who shares their passion, not just to win the White House. We don't need another Pyrrhic victory. Someone getting in there and have an R next to their name and do something very little different than managing the growth of Washington. We need something different. In 2008, the American public was convinced that they needed to have a president that they could believe in, who could solve their problems, pay their mortgage. But most Americans across this country realize that they don't need a president that they can believe in. They need a president who believes in them. We are going to do great in Louisiana today. We're going to battle it out in Wisconsin next week, and then 3 weeks later, Pennsylvania. I'm not asking you to help me as a favorite son. I'm asking you to stand up and do it for your sons and daughters so they will be free so they won't say what Ronald Reagan feared would be said in one of his great speeches. That he feared one day he would have to tell his children or his children's children about what it was like to live in an America that once was free. Ladies and gentlemen, you have always given me what I needed. I'm not asking you to do that. Give America what it needs. God bless you. Thank you.